Jake will go away in a minute here.
Okay.
Okay. Today is Monday, March 8th, 2021, and we will call the meeting to order at 5:32 p.m. with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item number 2 is school committee member introductions. We'll start with Ms. Avery on the screen and then go from there.
Good evening, Bobby Avery, Chief Administrative
We
Officer.
can't hear you, Bobby.
Can you hear me now?
Right, hang on, Bobby, we're about. Try now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You're good.
Okay, all right. Bobby Avery, Chief Administrative Officer.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Elgin Physical at 2.
Kevin Maduras Collins, Ward 3. Jake Lincoln, Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4. Linnea Hawkins, Ward 5.
Ron Martin, Ward 6.
Paul Bokola, Ward 7.
Alicia Ray, City Council Representative.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the COVID-19 update.
A couple of quick updates. Things are very similar to last week. The trend as it relates to schools is following a good note. So we have limited items that have come up. We have had some not big communication splashes, but we've had some outside of school close contacts that have resulted in people not being able to come into school to work, and we've been able to cover those with subs and other programming as we move forward. In addition, last week we did some communication towards the end of the week around vaccines. So we are looking at this site on the weekend for vaccinations for staff. The details of that are coming together. As they come together and shift, and we get them solidified with knowing how many doses, knowing which people, and all of that. We'll get that out to people just as soon as we can to turn that back around. But that, I think, has created a positive vibe that there'll be some availability of vaccines, and we'll continue to follow the rules from the state and working closely with our partners here in the community. It is looking like right now that this site will be a centralized site for Androscoggin County educators or educational staff. It won't be just for Lewiston Public School staff. We didn't know if it was going to go one way or the other, and right now that's where it's at. I'm awaiting a couple more pieces of information from our medical partners, and we should be able to get new messaging out to clarify for everyone, plus some signups within the next 24 hours. We should have everything out and about. Just waiting for a couple more pieces of information. It was a little disappointing to think that we were going to have more doses available to us. I think as a whole state, there were less available, but they still have committed a portion of those to educators and those in the education field. So it's a step in the right direction. It's not going to fix everything in one day, but it's a step in the right direction.
Ms. Ryan.
Thank you. Superintendent Langless, I just heard from a member of our community who works over in a different neighboring school district in Androscoggin County. I was chatting about how great it was that these conversations were happening for a vaccination site at Connors. And they were just confused about if they will hear from their own district superintendent or will they hear directly from LPS or just the public. What do we know what the mechanism is going to be to let folks know about this really great resource?
Yeah, that's a great question. As it stood this afternoon, we had a meeting this afternoon just before I came here actually. And the latest conversation was that they will be hearing from their own superintendents about the next steps. And again, myself included, we're all kind of waiting for a couple more pieces of information, and then we should be able to get that out. So there'll be some coordination by way of Lewiston Public Schools, obviously the site and some other overlaps, but they will be hearing from their superintendents or administration.
Mr. Maduras Collins.
Superintendent Langless, do we have a sense yet of what number of LPS staff have already been able to get a vaccine since it opened up to educators?
That's another great question. We don't have that statistic on hand. We're hopeful to know more as we go through this vaccination process. So for example, one of the big questions is, if you have X amount of doses available for this weekend, how many staff within a prescribed category will actually come get it? And none of us had that answer today, but we'll have that answer for the categories that are available to us for the weekend by the end of this week. And then beyond that, between those who have already gotten it, those who are already scheduled to get it, and those who might be choosing to be patient this round, we should have a better framework for this, but I think it's going to take a few weeks because of how quickly this is moving and changing on a daily basis.
And in addition to a site here at Connors, it sounds like potentially starting this weekend, educators are also able to get vaccinated at some commercial pharmacies. Is that right?
Yes. So
Walmart,
Walgreens, CVS, there's been other federal partnerships that have started, which has caused some confusion in state just for public consumption, because the announcement by President Biden to make this commitment to educators was a good one, and behind the scenes I believe there was some numbers shared, and then they were distributed a little differently than they have been in the past, where they kind of funneled through the state and they got parsed out. These went more directly to some of the commercial partners, which I understand. So what a lot of them have done is set up windows of time with specific counts, most of them after 3 o'clock. Some of them are during the day, but most of them for educators that are dedicated to educators after 3 o'clock. I also heard today, but I want to let the others confirm that the Auburn site at the mall, once that's up and running, they'll have in week 1 up to 300 vaccine doses that will be committed to educators or educational staff. So there are a number of ways for people to get it, and I'm just encouraging people to get it where you can, and we'll continue to work closely with them if other opportunities come up. I think once we run this clinic, we'll have a good sense of structure and setup and throughput, and it will allow us to, at the drop of a dime, do it again if that's what's needed. I am very happy though that there are a number of opportunities for educational staff to get vaccinated.
That's excellent, and that's really encouraging. And obviously, it's especially good to hear that they're making some times available there outside the school day. But I guess, do you feel that the district might be in a position to compensate folks who are able to get a time during the school day to go and get vaccinated, and in doing so, allow people to get vaccinated who are working in schools as quickly as possible?
I haven't taken a stance on that. We have talked about it lightly. The hard thing is we don't know where they're going for it. We don't know. It's so time frame, so many variables in the time frame. I still remain concerned that I'm going to look at a list one of these mornings, and because people can take the day for a medical thing, that's entirely their business. They have those days that can be used in that way, or for symptoms after they get vaccinated. We've looked at the nights and the weekends as a way to try to alleviate the pressures that teachers might face or educators might face to have to do certain things at certain times, to give them that opportunity. But we have not internally made any kind of to compensate people for that window other than them using their time. And it is so sporadic. I've heard from people who have gotten in. I've heard from people who have called 30 times a day and still don't have an appointment. So it would be hard to track, I think. Bobby, I don't know if you have thoughts on that as well.
Well, just the conversations, the thoughts that I've shared with you already, it's kind of the same, Kieran, it's kind of the same, in the same vein as to whether or not you would approve folks to be able to take time off the next day or whatever day it is if they're symptomatic. We're just waiting for word from you, actually. I don't know what neighboring districts are doing as far as that is concerned. But people do have their earned leave time and sick time available for use. So that'll be a decision we probably should be making as soon as we can.
But what I do know is that the Mass site in Auburn is looking at off hours. The 300 people after school gets out and run those 300 doses through that first week. I know we were looking at Friday night, Saturday. Our medical partners did actually say at one point in time, if we get enough doses, would you run Sunday? And I said, yes, we'll do what we need to do. There's some other concerns around shelf life and whatnot of doses. And I felt comfortable speaking on behalf of the committee that if it was a situation in which these things have to happen on Monday and we can get staff through at a good clip, that I believe this committee would support doing that if that's what it takes to do. But we've been able to, it does have some stability to it. We're looking at the Moderna vaccine for the weekend, and it does have some stability, so it can be done in that way. But if something came through that didn't, and it was, this is how you do it, I think we could stand it up quickly and get that done.
Yeah, and I would just say that I hope that this is a conversation. Chief Avery, it sounds like what you're saying is this is going to end up being a policy decision, but I would encourage the committee to take this up quickly. And, you know, I think that one of the things that we've been beset by the entire year is these sporadic and unexpected closings around close contact of staff and insufficient staffing at building levels. And I think it's important for members of the committee and also for the public to understand that when our staff is vaccinated, that stops. And we don't have to shut down buildings in the same way. And so if there are kids who are close contacts, they have to stay home, but the school can stay open. And that's ultimately, you know, a precursor to obviously a full reopening when there's robust vaccination across the board. But if that meant that we had to, you know, give teachers 2 days, it would, in my mind, be worth it to be able to say from here on out, we're never going to have to close another building.
Just I guess for the public's knowledge, the teachers getting the vaccine, that's just optional, correct?
Yes, well, it's considered a medical procedure. We cannot impose, at least I'm not comfortable imposing upon others that they must get it. And it just as a quick side, that the Moderna vaccine that we're looking at for the weekend, you get your first dose, and then 28 days later you get a second dose, and then it's another 2 weeks before you were considered fully vaccinated. There's a wait time after that second dose. So best case scenario, we were looking at it. If we go this weekend, we'd be looking at early April, the 9th, I think, don't quote me, to do another vaccination. And then we would be looking at a 2-week window after that. So you're talking towards the end of April for just whoever can get the vaccine this weekend through us or by other means before they're considered fully vaccinated.
Unless they can get the Pfizer, which is a 3-week turnaround, or
Pfizer's 21 day,
one.
and Johnson as well.
Yep.
Yeah, just one shot. It's still the 2 weeks after is the window.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Could we, and I know that you won't have this off the top of your head, but could we get a list of the vaccinations that are currently required for work to those in school?
From like an employment perspective?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know that we require vaccines.
we don't require, when we require student staff and we don't require staff.
That's my understanding. Bobby, I don't know if you know that off the top of your head. From an employment perspective, we don't require vaccinations.
So we don't from an employee perspective, but I believe we do for students. And Karen, you might know that list better than I.
Yeah, the list.
Sure.
We have it up.
No, I didn't figure you would.
But yes, it's part of the state. Up this right.
Thank you. Just kind of along the line of thinking as Member Majerus Collins, I think I had suggested this a couple weeks back, but I'm realizing now there might not be a way to do this. So we as an employer would not require vaccination, but would we ever keep track of how many folks have it, just so we understand the health of our employees and that community, just for benchmarking, not like we care who has it and who doesn't. I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
All the language I've seen from just legal advice around the vaccination is that you can't, it's strongly recommended you not require it.
Right.
Any tracking of that is a medical record. And so I'd be careful. I would definitely want to talk to legal, but if you've been vaccinated, that's considered a medical record. I don't know if we want to be in the possession of medical records.
Okay, that makes sense to me. And don't want to run afoul of the law in any way, but it would be interesting to understand how our adult community is doing with vaccinations in case we were able to open earlier even, or modify our system in a different way in order to accommodate all the feedback some of the feedback we've heard. Because I think, again, the goal is shots in arms and then butts in seats. So just trying to see if there's any way to hasten either part of that process along. And then just to Member Majoris Collins's question, anyone who went to, I think, college or university that receives federal funding is required to prove immunizations. So I would guess many of our faculty and staff have college degrees or started college, and so they would have to be vaccinated for certain things through that.
I am open to the conversation around, like you said, once we get closer with vaccinations, how we get kids back in school more frequently is at the top of my list.
And that's a great segue. If there's no other comments right now, I wanted to make a motion. I've heard from community members, parents, and teachers who feel like they don't have a voice in discussions around reopening schools. Guidance from both the state and federal health officials is changing rapidly, daily at times, and it's clear that it's important for us to have a solid plan in place for re-entry if and when the guidelines change for our schools. Waiting until summer is not an option. Our community needs the reassurance of knowing that we have a plan in place, and this will help calm a lot of fears, concerns, and frustration, and will show our school community that we're listening to them. As a result of the input that I've received from our community and the rapid changes in guidance, I would like to make a motion to direct the superintendent to create a task force.
Point of order.
Yes,
This isn't on the agenda.
it's tied into the COVID update.
You've said consistently that relevant issues can't be rated as votes. And if you want to change that guidance, that's totally fine with me. I'm up for it. But that just is going to mean that any future agenda item can have a vote coming from it. Is that fine?
So I'm making a motion in regards to the COVID update.
Right. So what I'm saying is, in the past, motions have been ruled out of order because there wasn't a vote listed on the agenda. If the chair's changing that guidance, then I'm totally supportive of that.
I think suspending the rules has been voted against, not.
Right. So the issue has been that motions have been made, stemming off of agenda items like you're doing right now. And those motions have been ruled out of order and require a suspension of the rules. If we're moving away from doing that, I welcome that change. I think it's a correct interpretation. I just want to make it clear that's what we're doing. That now motions coming directly off of agenda items with regard to an agenda item are allowable and don't require suspension of rules. Is that
I'm
correct?
not following what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, could I weigh in from parliamentary procedure space? So what Member Majoris Collins is suggesting is that if there is any item to be voted upon that is not listed explicitly as a vote on the agenda, what the standard practice has been is that there's a motion to suspend the rules, a vote is taken, and then the motion is presented. Sometimes we present them simultaneously as a motion to suspend the rules and take up, and then you would read whatever your motion is in front of you. But I think what he's suggesting is that past practice has been suspension and then the motion, and since there's no motion on the agenda, if we proceed in the way that you were proposing, which is totally fine, that would have to be consistent moving forward is all. So in the future, suspension of the rules wouldn't be the debate, the motion would be the debate. Did I help?
I'm also curious, if you were to finish that, I don't know if it's something that needs a motion or not, or if it's something that we can do.
So should I finish it and then we'll decide that?
I actually am looking for a ruling on this question, whether a suspension of the rules is required to consider the motion. And I hope that it isn't, but I'm looking for either the chair of the parliamentary or both to provide guidance on that so that we can establish a precedent going forward.
If you were asking my opinion, the precedent that has been set is that a suspension of the rules has been taken, needing a 2/3 majority of the body to move forward, and then the motion has been presented, needing a simple majority of 5 or more to move forward. That's past practice. Again, the chair directs these meetings, so the chair can set a new precedent, but that will be the precedent moving forward.
So a motion tied to the discussion requires a suspension of the rules is what you're saying.
Because there's no vote on our agenda. Was there an amended agenda sent out?
So a point of where I communicated this specific issue to the chair and to the superintendent several weeks ago as an effort to streamline meetings. And I would just encourage you to just proceed with your motion and acknowledge a changed precedent. And then moving forward, we won't require suspensions of the rules to consider motions that are pertinent to agenda items.
But I feel like this is different conversations, because I think the conversation that we had around what you're talking about was tied to a workshop, and that we had previously stated that we weren't going to vote during workshops when you wanted to make a motion during a workshop. So that was what that conversation was, not tied to regular business
So as a
meetings.
point of order, the workshops are discussions that precede an official meeting being gavelled and called to order. And those obviously were not in session and we can't take a vote, it's just a conversation. But if there's an agenda item that's on the agenda subsequent to a meeting having been called to order, which is what it was in that particular instance, that would be a regular agenda item, whether it's called a workshop or not. It's on the agenda, it's an agenda item. I think you should proceed with this precedent. I'm trying to make it clear that this is now the new precedent.
Mr. Bizik?
I think the purpose of moving on, I think we should just go ahead, if you want to put it out there, just go ahead and suspend the rules. That's how, if you really want an update today.
Okay, so I will make a motion to suspend the rules to have a discussion or to vote, I guess, to make a motion to direct the superintendent to create a task force on reopening our schools. Do you want the rest of the details now or after? I can lump it all into one, right? Ms. Ray?
So so just to suspend the rules to take up a discussion and potential vote on creating a task force on reopening is plenty. You just need a second to your motion.
Second by Mr. Parker.
And then now that's open for discussion. Any discussion, Mr. Majerus-Collins?
I wish that the precedent had been changed in this subject, but given that we're just having a conversation about suspending the rules, this is something that I don't believe that members of the public are aware of and is being brought forward by the person who controls the agenda. I don't understand why it wouldn't have been on the agenda given that fact. The other 8 members of the committee don't have the ability to put something on the agenda if they want to raise it, but in this case you do, so I'm going to have to vote against this.
Mr. Bizik?
I think it's a proactive stance, which I think in our district the past years have always been reactive, and having a discussion to kind of move the chess pieces a little bit to kind of almost create, well, if this happens we can do this, if this happens we can do that, and I think it's the right step in the direction of proactive thinking, trying to have the ability and the thought knowledge and some procedures put in place to go to the final goal, which is to pack every unit in our school. So you get a yes from me.
Any other discussion? Sorry, Ms. Ray.
Thank you. I just wanted to weigh in on this. I think, like I just said, I think there's a natural order of what comes next. Shots in arms, butts in seats, return to in-person learning. But we just spoke recently about predictability for our faculty and staff. And sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. On the suspension of the rules, I think due to the fact that it wasn't on the agenda when the superintendent and chair meet on the agenda each week, it seems curious to me, and I don't think I can support it.
So could you tell us what your reasoning is for this?
I got a lot of communication over the weekend, this weekend. I received several emails and phone calls. And then this afternoon, another person had reached out to me and suggested that we move this forward as quickly as possible. And so with some of the changes that were sent out by health officials this afternoon, it seemed like this was the right time. So it would have, I could have done it as an agenda item if it had come to me prior to the agenda being out on Thursday.
So could you tell us a little bit about what the guidelines are, or the lifted restrictions, or whatever it is that?
I don't think anything that changed today is going to have any sort of an immediate impact on what we're doing in our schools, but it's just that things are changing very rapidly and we don't have we don't have a firm plan in place. And I don't want us to end up, last August, I know we had a lot changing with the superintendent and leadership, so there was reasons for it, but we didn't have a plan right up until a week before school was supposed to open. And that was difficult for everyone, students, teachers, parents, and I just don't think that we should end up in that place again. And so with everything changing so quickly now seems like the right time. We have teachers, parents who are saying, no one's hearing us, we just want a voice. And this is a way to give people a voice, give them involvement, make sure we're hearing all of the sides and making, like Mr. Physick said, a proactive plan.
Was there something specific that came out today that we should
There were health changes today, but I can't speak to all of the details about it. But there were a lot of changes
for
today.
me. I haven't heard anything, so I don't know, and I'm guessing that other people have been working today too that might not know what came about today to prompt some of that. So, I'm in favor of having a task force to start talking about this. I don't see anything wrong with it. I think that we should be putting our heads together, but.
Mr.
I would just say that this debate should be focused on the motion to suspend the rules and take up the item. And you know, I would just, you know, we're going to have a conversation about the merits of the motion if this passes.
Any further discussion? Or we'll start with Ward 4 tonight. I think that's where we're at, right, with voting.
So just to clarify, this is to suspend the rules.
To suspend the rules to have a discussion around creating a task force. Ward 4.
Yes.
5.
Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
No?
Ward 1. Oh, am I supposed to go after Ms. Wright? I vote yes. Ward 1.
No.
Ward 2.
Yes.
3.
No.
That's it.
So I will go back to what I was saying. As a result of the input I received from our community and the rapid changes in guidance from health officials, I would like to make a motion to direct the superintendent to create a task force on reopening our schools. This task force will include an equitable representation of members of our community, to include teachers, parents, students, and other interested community members. I would request an effort is made to solicit at least one parent representative from each school and to connect with ethnic-based community organizations to ensure a diverse makeup on the task force.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Majerus-Collins.
I think that the prospects for expanded in-person education prior to the end of the school year are more encouraging than they were a few weeks ago. But I still think that this kind of move is premature. I think that Member Ray made a good point about stability for our teachers. We recently got done having a conversation about the possibility of bringing students back on Wednesdays, which some members of this committee agitated for. And I just think that it's important to provide some stability and frankly to allow our administration to be laser focused on getting as many people vaccinated as fast as possible. And once we're to a point where, you know, our staff is largely vaccinated, then we're obviously in a position to have a robust conversation about bringing more people back into buildings.
Yeah, I definitely think that what I'm envisioning is sort of a stepped approach that says, like, once X amount of teachers are vaccinated, this is what will happen. Once this happens, this will happen. I think I've read some reopening plans for various schools in the state and around the country who already have these task forces. That sounds weird. And that's the approach that they're taking, is saying when this happens, this will happen. And I think that that's what we need, and it'll help spell things out. I'm not suggesting that this task force will be created and we'll be demanding teachers return to school in 2 weeks. That's not what I'm not putting a timeline on this at all. I'm just saying that we should start now. And if that plan ends up going until the fall when we start school again, then that's fine. But I don't think there should be a time frame on it, and it shouldn't interrupt any kind of stability or anything that we're doing for our teachers and our students right now. But I think that it's a proactive approach to start getting some plans in place. Mr. Majoros Collins.
I appreciate that, and I think that if this were to pass, would be the right way to go. But I also do wonder about sort of where this is coming from, and I understand that there are members of our community who are very unhappy to come face to face with the reality of the pandemic, and would like to wish it out of existence. But for my purposes, I would rather rely on the administration's communications directly with the state authorities and the health professionals. And I'm just not convinced of, at this early stage, the merits of bringing in people who may be very passionate about this conversation, but don't necessarily have any expertise to bring to bear on the conversation of what is actually healthy to do in terms of bringing kids back into buildings. I think, again, as we discussed previously, I think it's really important not to give people a false sense that something is moving forward when we have to rely on the state health authorities.
Mr. Physick.
So, like anything else, I've been in this community since 2004, and I can tell you there's a lot of things that's transpired throughout the years that I would say that the public didn't get a chance to even speak about. There's a lot of things, currently in our school system that the public didn't get a chance to kind of voice their opinion. And so with something like this, where again, this is a problem, I'm all for putting together a task force to look at things. And obviously we are driven by the state, but just having those conversations around stuff. And I would, one thing I've said, most of the things that task force committees have been started in our under superintendent is they've always had both sides of the story. I mean, both sides of the point of view. So like, I'm sure there's people who want to get back into school, and I'm sure some people are saying, hey, hang on, wait a minute. And it's about just having those conversations and how some of that stuff will look like, and having both points of view. And I already know from looking at the budget that, there's going to be still a lot of online stuff, but just giving people just the opportunity just to talk about some of these things where they felt like they haven't had a voice. They felt like some of the voices that they have to put their faith in, or the other people have position over them, have not been able to hear what they've had to say. And so I support this as a step in the right direction. My biggest thing is just be able to have both sides of the point of view on the issue, so every point of view is heard.
Ms. Wright.
Thank you. I did want to reflect on our conversation very recently about bringing folks back on Wednesday, bringing students back in person on Wednesdays, and the intricacies of that. And I believe during that conversation, and perhaps during that motion, we asked the superintendent for a forum for these issues. I was wondering if the superintendent might tell us what's happened there and if that might be suitable for folks. I think a task force on reopening doesn't feel right to me, because if it's a tiered reopening, then some students are getting priority over others. I'm not sure how that would work out with who is at the table, and I'm sure folks would do their best to be representative, but there's always going to be someone who can't be at the table due to capacity or other issues. So sorry. Original question, where is the forum stand at this point, Superintendent?
Right now, I'm waiting for the date that will work well with our Lexikey platform. And once we have that, so that all parents can participate, we'll share that date out.
Thank you. I just would reflect that. I think it's giving some false hope to folks to say that we're going to move towards a reopening task force, because if that's the headline in the paper, then that's what people are going to see. And that's not true to the direction of the committee so far. I do think it, to Ms. Member Physick's point, being prepared is a great idea, and I'm sure the administration is working on that. But I think a feedback forum feels very different from a task force. and just the public perception of what that is bears heavy on my mind in this vote.
Mr. Beaumont.
To clarify, the task force recommendations will be only that recommendations. The school committee will eventually vote on it.
Right, obviously.
Okay, and again, we go against, as I think we've all stressed, the CDC guidelines and safety for all involved would be premature.
Right.
And I'm sure the school committee would recognize that, and I hope the public would, but sometimes we have to put safety in front of everything else. So I would be in favor of the task force to explore options. Again, proposals, recommendations, not here's what we're doing. Thank you.
Ms. Hawkins.
From what I've read, it wasn't, okay,
You got the bad seat today.
but, and it wasn't fun to read, trying to understand what the CDC guidelines actually say, can take a little bit of work. I didn't see anything in there saying if the schools can demonstrate herd immunity among their teachers, the guidelines can be loosened. There's nothing in there like that. So even if we did get all of our teachers vaccinated, that doesn't mean we're changing spacing guidelines or opening the schools back up. That needs to be really clear. I think the task force is a good idea, but the forum I think needs to happen too, because there are a lot of people who just really don't understand what's what. There's a lot of hope and a lot of please can we do this, but there's not a lot of clear understanding of what the boundaries really are. So I think having both is going to be really important. I agree some with what Alicia said about not holding out, this is going to happen, when it's clearly not going to happen in the time frame people would be thinking it is.
Right, and I think that all of I've reviewed a few different districts, reentry plans, or I think they're called different things, and all of them are consistent in saying when this is allowed, when this following CDC guidelines. I'm not suggesting that we get a group of people together that says, screw the state, basically. I'm not suggesting that in any way. That I think the expectation would still be following all CDC guidelines and doing what needs to happen, but just getting a plan in place. So when those things happen, we already have the plan. I think that's what I'm sort of envisioning and what I've seen other districts doing.
And the likelihood of the CDC saying, well, this one school in Maine, this one school district, they've got all their teachers immunized, we're gonna loosen it up for them. That's not gonna happen. CDC, I think, is smarter than that. So.
Yeah, just really quickly, that I see this task force as something that's that needs to happen at one point in time or another. It doesn't mean something's going to happen next month, 2 months. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Eventually, we're going to get back in school. And I think everybody's input in designing this and their comfort level and their concerns being raised and talked through, I think is beneficial to moving forward.
Mr. Madrid comments?
I'm worried about the impact that this vote would have on staff morale and perceptions of what we're doing. I think that we really did just recently consider a proposal that this committee rejected rather robustly. And I think that I appreciate that some members of on this committee are hearing from passionate but misguided people about what we can do. And I think that we all have an obligation to just be straightforward with people about what's possible. I think that what's really encouraging about vaccinations is the prospect that you won't have to close another school. I think that's the message that folks at home need to take heart in, is that in relatively short order with staff vaccinations, we can be at a point where schools don't have to close just because there's a case, just because the staff members have exposure, because they also have immunity. And so that's a real win. That's something that we should be pushing towards and celebrating and embracing. And hopefully we'll get to a point soon where we can start to have a more robust conversation about getting people in, but the focus has to be on vaccinations. And I just don't see the value in suggesting to the community that we're moving towards reopening when we're at minimum, 2-3 months away from doing that. So I'm going to vote against this.
Mr. Gagan.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of task forces and groups trying to, make decisions that are difficult. say the least. I do worry about the perception, not only for the staff, but also for the general public. And I'll end it with a quote from one of my favorite guys, Dwight Eisenhower. So a plan is nothing. Planning is everything. As long as we're planning, at least moving forward, thinking about it, that's great. But to say, okay, today we have a plan, it's basically worthless, because it will change.
Ms. Whitlow.
Dang it, I disagree with you, Mr. Damon.
Okay.
No, but I think even if the community has a perception of what the task force might be, it's a perception, it's just like every headline in the Sun Journal, right? I mean, come on. But even if we don't go back to school in person full-time this year, there still might be funds in the budget for summer school. We need to know how to do that. Like, there's so many things, sports, there's a lot of things. And I just don't see anything wrong with putting people together to come up with a plan on how we'll roll this out when the time is right. So I would like to call vote. Oh, sorry, Alicia.
Mr. Wright.
Thank you. So I have to disagree. Perception is reality. And I think that's how we found ourselves in a sticky conversation a couple of weeks ago about this, when, folks reached out and thought they had, and did have different ideas than what we had talked about publicly about reopening and Wednesdays and the complications. I mean, we talk about it every week about the buses and transportation and how that's equity based. Our values are represented in the actual delivery of students to and from school. So I really caution folks against this. I also just wanted to ask the chair, I know it wasn't on the agenda, so folks might not be here to speak about it or ready to speak about it, but I was wondering if the public might participate, just in case anyone listening does have something to weigh in on.
2 people as attendees and 1 person in person. And this, let anyone like to speak.
Good evening, Allison Litton, LEA President, LPS Parent and Family Engagement Coordinator at Connors.
Hang on just 1 second. Did we lose the connection?
No, you didn't.
Okay, all right. It stopped out.
Static electricity will throw it and I just reset it.
Okay,
So I appreciate the idea, and I think getting more of our community involved in discussions is a vital piece of our work. I do just want to point out that as elected officials, you're here to represent your communities. The superintendent was hired by you to also make decisions, and we have 2 people on. So school committee attendance, I think, is something that if folks are really concerned and wanting to hear or have a forum to put their opinion out there and to ask for certain things, I think this is the forum to do it. But we don't see people come. We don't see people show up. But there's a lot of folks that are very comfortable behind their screens, giving their opinions and their asks out. So I'm curious to know if there would be a lot of people that would take part in this task force. Would it be unbiased, I'd ask? Or is it, truly those folks that are stating their opinions publicly about their displeasure with how things have been at this point? If this does go forward, I would ask that teachers be changed to educators. I think a lot of times we forget about that, and a lot of our colleagues are really underrepresented due to the language of teachers. There are many folks that are impacted by our opening, our reopening, our closing, our everything, that often don't get a seat at that table. There was discussion about the 3 feet between folks. I know that there's a petition going around right now asking the state of Maine to reconsider that. the DOE particularly. And we asked a couple weeks ago, just for LEA membership, what are you at right now for your distance between the students? We had about 100 people that gave us input, and only one of them said that they could maintain 6 feet between kids. So that's 99 of our classrooms that aren't able to do that. We did have about 18 that said they're not even able to do 3 feet constantly. There's also 6 feet between folks when they're eating. And we have some that are standing in hallways or sitting in hallways or at places that aren't normally desks, so that they can have that 6 feet. Educators are also not eating with their kids because they need that space as well. So that's something to consider. There was some mention of tracking the vaccines. If educators return to school in X amount of weeks, there's no way we can tell how many or what percentage of LPS educators, and you just had that discussion, are actually being vaccinated. So that would be a hard kind of thing to go by. So just something to think about there. But somebody had mentioned that the consistency is an important piece, and that was discussed back about the Wednesday discussion. I can tell you with pretty good confidence that educators are not feeling settled right now because the conversations continue. We heard you vote to say that we were going to stay the course as Superintendent Linguist had directed or recommended, and that was approved. But then there's consistently more discussions about what can we do, how can we get more kids in, how can we do this faster. We're all in this together, but it's like the sea is just getting rockier every turn. So, a lot of my colleagues can't be here or just mentally are not in the space to take on one more thing. So I'm here to be their voice. And those are truly the points that I just wanted to make sure are being considered in this conversation. Thank you.
To clarify, again, I'm not suggesting that we change anything immediately. I'm not suggesting we take away any stability that was provided at the last meeting when we voted on anything like this. I am not suggesting that anything's going to change before the end of this school year. I'm just suggesting that we start having conversations to plan for when things do change to a level where kids can return to school. I don't want anyone to think that this is somehow trying to be a sneaky backdoor way of getting kids back in school sooner or disregarding vaccinations or any of, or the 3 feet guide, 6 feet guidelines, none of that stuff. It's just starting the conversations about how our kids will get back in school when the time is right. Mr. Visick.
If you read all the articles, the science says that pretty much we're going to be in this hybrid model at least at the beginning of the school year. That's what the scientists say. They're probably a lot more smarter than I am. But I think having this discussion might be a discussion of how to do hybrid model better. I can say from having kids in school, having a kid in the high school, if you select cohort C, life for your child, excuse the expression, sucked. Your kid was basically late out on their own trying to learn something. And, yes, finally we got some learning labs and things like that. But it might just be a simple discussion of how do we do cohort C better? How do we do hybrid better? How do we make less work for some of the teachers? Some of that stuff could be, just having those discussions, not necessarily mean all of a sudden we're going to have all the kids back in school. But it just might mean that, hey, this is what the CD's saying, and how do we do better? Because I believe we can do better. It might be something just bolstering our technology. So, if a high school kid is at home, he can actually just zoom right in and see what's going on in the classroom instead of kind of being out on his own and trying to watch a teacher who's a great video. The science is a great video of trying to follow through of doing a lab at home. That just might be something as just being able to be, you're going along just along with the other kids. You're not feeling like you're on an island. So I think the task force can do a lot of different things, not necessarily that we're going to just all of a sudden be back in school and be back to normal. And I like to see the task force with some of the teachers' input be really used a lot to kind of drive some of this, if this gets off the ground, and drive some of these discussions and some of the discussions where, how do we do hybrid better? I brought along some things since the school year, and I know they weren't popular among the administration. And I didn't think it was a detriment to the education. But I thought it was along the lines of kind of just moving in the right direction of listening to teachers. They have valid opinions. They're the professionals, and letting them kind of do that work with kind of some of the micromanaging that I feel that was taking place. So I think this task force can do a whole lot. Again, it's having all stakeholders at the table, and again, it's about hearing everybody. And again, how do we look at this at an academic level, not necessarily an emotional level?
Thank you.
I called the vote. How about that?
You're calling the vote that's gonna require 2/3 to move on to the vote. If I think two more people get to talk, we might be able to avoid it.
Mr. Majoris Collins.
I thought that if we're gonna go forward with this, it ought to be a little more fine tuned, so I would make a motion to amend the proposed item to allocate 1/3 of the seats on any task force to representatives appointed by the LEA.
Ms. Ray, are you raising your hand to comment, or?
I'm not providing a second.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Thank you for the clarification. Okay. There's no second.
Can I have a question, just kind of off this thing? I mean, shouldn't there always be teacher representative out of mostly everything that we do as far as task forces? I mean, I know I've had, discussions with Allison and, about collaboration, and it's almost like if we're trying to do something, and again, we're moving chess pieces, it's almost like we should always have teacher input, whether it's LEA or what's a tag. It's a tag, like those people should always be involved and these especially these kind of discussions.
They would be.
I think it's important to hear the voice of everyone, whether they're a union member or not, and whether everyone.
And again, I understand, and I've said this before, I understand there's gotta be some oversight, but I just, and I'm hoping we're still moving in the right direction as far as collaboration goes of the people who are boots on ground doing this work, that they're kind of, that their knowledge and expertise are being passed up to the higher ups.
Ms. Ray.
I wanted to ask if the chair superintendent would read the motion again, and I might have a question.
Read it, or did you write it? Direct the superintendent to create a task force on reopening our schools. And do you want me to reread the makeup of the task force? Is that part of the motion? Yes, okay. To include an equitable representation of members of our community, to include teachers, which should say educators. I apologize for that. Parents, students, and other interested community members. And I would request an effort is made to solicit at least one parent representative from each school and connect to ethnic-based community organizations to ensure a diverse makeup on the task force.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, TAG is made up of association members and non. It's a very broad mix.
Okay. Mr. Beaumont.
I'm still trying to get my feet down on the ground on the procedure. Does Mr. Majoris' Collins motion need a second?
It would have needed a second, yes.
It's been seconded.
It has
It was not seconded.
Need it seconded?
Sure.
Go for it.
Any discussion on whether or not to require a specific amount of union members? Mr. Majoris Collins.
The LEA is a critical partner for our schools. Without our educators, we could not function. And I think that this year we have given a lot of lip service to respecting our educators, but not always followed through with actions. I think that if we're going to move down a path that could potentially unsettle people and raise yet another series of concerns about deviating from a plan that we just approved 6-2 to continue with, that at the very least there ought to be a robust presence of our educators
and representatives from the LEA to ensure that this is, anything that comes out of this task force is something that has broad support, because, you know, if it's gonna be useful, it needs to be something that is not gonna come to this committee and just die. And I would be concerned that if the task force is reflective only of a small group of very loud advocates for getting kids back into schools faster than the science allows for, you know, that would just be setting us up to have another conversation not dissimilar to the one that we just had on Wednesdays, where we voted to stay the course. And so, you know, I think that if this task force is going to be useful, it needs to have a really broad base of support that includes our union representation.
I think the concern about keeping teachers at ease and not keeping the consistency, I think if that concern is genuine, then we should stop saying right now that this task force has the potential to do this and this task force has the potential to do that, and all of those things that it has the potential to do are unsettling, because then you're putting that idea of unsettling ideas out there when I said repeatedly and made it clear that all of those unsettling ideas are not what I am suggesting that this task force do. So if we're genuinely concerned about people having the wrong idea, then we should stop putting the wrong idea out there.
With due respect,
Point of order. I believe the member from Jervis Collins made it from the amendment to your motion.
Right.
Unless you accept it and the second of your original motion accepted, it can't be full.
it's not a friendly amendment. It's just a regular.
If you want the parliamentarian view on that, it has been motioned and seconded as an to amend the motion, and it will need to be voted on. Then if there's a new motion with the amendment, that will have to be voted on. We are debating the amendment to the motion, though.
Ms. Hawkins.
The only question I have is, would it be acceptable to change it from a third of the representation being from LEA to being educators? That way it can be LEA members as well as ed techs, other staff from the schools who also have a hand in educating, because teacher sees part of it, our janitorial staff sees part of it, our facility staff sees part of it. If we're gonna have an equitable group, everybody should be able to be at the table.
Mr. Majerus-Collins.
No. The LEA includes folks that are not just teachers, so it is a broader spectrum of people. And this would still leave 2/3 of any potential task force to provide representation for, you know, all kinds of other groups. So, you know, I would encourage the superintendent to make sure that he's using those 2/3 of other seats to get broader representation. But I think that it's really important that, you know, if you move away from ensuring that the organized bargaining unit that represents teachers and educators more generally, you know, if we don't guarantee that they have a real voice at the table, then we can't be sure that the folks who are being picked to serve on this are going to be representative of the broad collection of educators in Lewiston. Whereas with this, we ensure that the LEA has ample voice at the table. And then in addition to that, I would encourage the superintendent to include other folks as well. But I would also say that, you know, I would point out that the chair was one of 2 members to vote against the superintendent's recommendation to stay the course on Wednesdays. And that now we're considering something that isn't on the agenda, you know, called a reopening task force. So I don't think that it's undue concern for folks that certain members of this committee are pushing hard to move beyond what the administration has recommended and beyond what the science allows. And you know, I think that that's reality. That's what I'm hearing from the folks who talk to me. And so, you know, I think that's a real concern, and it's a real concern that a number of people have, and that's, you know, they don't need any help from me to feel that way.
I personally, with this motion and what I'm proposing, am not encouraging anyone to move beyond what the science or the CDC allows. I would like to make that clear. That's not what I'm suggesting, and that's not what I'm asking for. Mrs. Lynn.
Allison Litton. Can I clarify, the motion is that the third will be appointed by the LEA?
Yes.
Okay, so I can assure you that it wouldn't just be association members. We do have a very broad membership, but we do lack in some categories. So, if that were given to me to decide, or to my executive board, that would be something that we would explore, just like we appointed to TAG and we made sure there was representation. So please consider that.
Any other discussion? Ms. Wright?
Thank you. I just want to reflect on the idea, and I appreciate that folks have clarified that this would be positions that the LEA would weigh in on. And I initially was just thinking that it was just teachers based on the motion. So I appreciate that clarification, and I'm glad this is moving forward to a vote for an amendment.
Any other discussion? Starting with Ward 4, we are voting on the amendment to the original motion. Ward 5. 6.
No.
7.
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
No. Ward 1?
No.
Ward 2?
No.
Ward 3?
Yes. That's 5 no's, so this motion failed. 5-4.
So now we start with Ward 4, voting on the original motion.
Yes.
5.
Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City Council?
No.
Ward 1?
No.
2?
Yes.
3?
No.
And I vote yes.
Motion passes 6-3.
So at the end of the vote, anything else? Did you have anything else? Agenda item number 4, to report from student representatives who are not with us tonight because they have a lot going on. Agenda item number 5 is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that members would like removed? Seeing none, the consent agenda passes. Agenda item number 6, public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and/or affiliation with Lewiston Public Schools.
If I may, working with Bates College, who's a great partner, you may see a number of attendees pop up, but they may be watching via stream, but there's a classroom of education students who have been working with us. We joined their classroom today to do some Q&A, and they might pop in just to observe. So if you see a large influx, just know that it's the class joining in, but they weren't sure if they were going to join in or if they were just going to stream. So just in case you see a big uptake.
Are there any members of the public attending online that would like to speak on non-agenda items? Hands. I will continue to agenda item number 7, to receive, discuss, and possibly vote on school committee procedural rules.
So the procedural rules were shared with you by email, and I believe the task would be to discuss that and approve. We'll make amendments as the committee sees fit.
Mr. Majerus-Thomas.
These procedural rules have a number of internally contradictory sections. They also have some basic grammatical and punctuation errors and a number of other issues. I am happy to provide at any later date a clean version of what I think needs to be changed, but otherwise I'm going to have to go through a rather laborious process of proposing amendments to clean them up. And with that in mind, I would make a motion to table until a future meeting.
Second.
Thanks.
Any discussion on tabling the procedural rules until we can clean it up? Sounds like a good idea. Ms. Wright.
I just want to clarify how the superintendent would like to receive suggestions for this. I know that when we do policy subcommittee, we take the notes, we do a clean copy, a track changes copy. This feels very different because it's not being referred anywhere. So folks are, I guess I just want to clarify what's the next step to get this back to us in a votable scenario.
If people have recommendations for edits, I would agree that the track changes version with the clean version is very helpful to digest. I would agree with the sentiments of Member Janice Collins that there are a number of things in here that may contradict each other that might bring us to a fruitful discussion. Document took some time to come together over the fall, and I think we're in a different place, so it's probably worth revisiting.
I get that, and as someone, the rules are near and dear to my heart. So I would encourage reflection upon that as well. I also think we added in Superintendent Langlis. I made the reference to LD 2167 about the COVID-19 public health emergency and electronic participation, but I think in as we head towards vaccination land, I don't know what to call it, the after times, that will be something that needs to evolve over time as well, whether or not this committee uses electronic means for participation of board members and employees over time.
Mr. Rogers, comments?
So my changes to this fall into two categories. One of them would be what I would consider to be non-controversial changes to make the rules more usable. And the second would be my ideas on what should be either added or taken away that is substantive and could be a source of disagreement. I would be happy to clean up what is here on the non-controversial changes, and then also have the things that I think we should talk about. I just haven't gotten a chance to do it since we got out on the 3rd. It's just I have the meeting to get to it. I haven't gotten to it. But if that is something that would make things easier for the administration or anyone else, I'm happy to do that, to separate between, perfunctory items that are internal contradictions or duplications or missing periods, and items that are more substantive, and to bifurcate those so that we can take them up in the future.
If it were created as a Google Doc, then we could put, individual members could put notes on the side for things that they would like to see adjusted, or and then we could all kind of follow it as it happens before the next meeting. And
I can.
everybody can put their input in on the sides if there's things that they want changed.
I'd be happy to do that.
Any other discussion on tabling this?
I'll again take the heat on this one, but I'm really not sure what procedural rules categories. Could you explain for the new guy here?
So the procedural rules are the rules that are supposed to be adopted essentially every January by this committee. And it spells out our procedural rules for how we handle the meetings, how we address things, how the agenda is created, the response time when people ask for items to be put on an agenda. It just spells out basically our, it's not the code of conduct because we have that as a separate document, but it basically spells out how we proceed for the whole year as a board.
And the intent is that it aligns to charter, it aligns to state law, and there's just some other areas where the committee gets to decide how it wants to conduct its business, and that's what this document. I think
Was the plan to rewrite it or just to amend it?
It gets revisited every January, and sometimes it just gets passed through. If nobody wants to make any changes. This committee specifically has made a lot of changes. We had started with it last January, and I think we ultimately passed it in like October. And so now we're revisiting it again already. Traditionally, it is something that has been discussed at the retreat in January, so that the committee can sort of weigh what they want to change, and then it gets passed at the next meeting from there. But that didn't happen this time.
Okay, good. It's a little better right here now. Thank you.
Any other discussion on tabling? Word form.
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City council.
Yes.
1,
Yes.
2,
Yes.
3.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion to table and come back with edits. Passes 9-0.
Agenda item number 8 to review the following cost center categories: Articles 7, 11, and 4. Is anyone opposed to taking a very quick break? Okay. Very good.
All right, so transitioning into budget conversation. Similar to last time, I started with just a few slides, but I'll be brief so that we can jump back to seeing the screen presentation. Our goal is reiterated, planning for our most vulnerable and remediating the impacts of the pandemic. Some anchor questions: what's in the best interest of our students? What's required for the work we know we want to do? What is fiscally responsible that aligns to research for high-performing schools? And how do we balance the need that we know with the expense of schools? We'll talk about Article 7, school administration. You'll see Office of the Principal on your sheet, tab 2. And there's minimal change to that. Again, in tab 2, as you'll see, and there's been contractual adjustments. We'll talk about Article 11, which is all other, crossing guard in there that it's included. Article 4, other instruction. We'll talk about summer school, which again, I've kind of led into this in prior budget meetings, that in this particular budget, we pulled summer school out as a reduction with the intent of using relief funds if it remains out. But that also leaves me very concerned that that's an item that's not in. And if we were to go back to this next year, we'd be having a conversation about a significant increase to return it to the budget, as the relief funds may have been used at that point in time. In co-curricular, you'll see, hear about things around stipends and those costs. And extracurricular, we'll talk about the assistant athletic director and some other pieces there. Just trying to set the stage for that. I know that Bobby probably has a whole spread near her at her station, and if there are any questions about what's in this and what's not, feel free to bring them up, and we will do our best to share with you. So if we look at Article 7, again, the summary is under tab 2. And Article 7 lands on the second page of that. And you can see underneath Office of the Principal, the percent of our budget is under 4% in this area. The state average is over 5%. And we're looking at an increase this year of 2.13%. And that's built around large in part contracts and contract increases. Bobby, are there other items in that area that we should be highlighting?
Sorry for the delay, my mouse, I couldn't get it to work. Let's see, not really. It's basically contractual. It depends on what line you're looking at. We had a shift in administration at Connors, which has lowered that salary account some. And let's see, there's some change, a little bit of change at the high school for professional development. And that's about it. We do have an increase for Jake. I can't remember the position. I spoke with you about it this morning at the high school in the administration line. ROTC.
Yes, we have to. That's one that we have to examine. There's one in there. It's a ROTC program, which is housed at the high school, but for some reason, one of the staff is coded to the Office of the Principal, which may have something to do with what ROTC requires of us, but we have to dig deeper to make sure that that's accurate.
And other than all the normal ins and outs between benefits and all of that, that's it.
Mr. Majerus.
Chief Avery, could you let me know what the dollar value is on the office supplies that we're taking out here?
Yes, I did send all of you an email with a spreadsheet as it relates to that. And so I didn't prepare office supplies for the Office of the Principal. I prepared instructional supplies as well as textbook supplies. So if you're interested in the Office of the Principal supplies, I'll have to do that for Wednesday.
Okay, yeah,
Office supplies always strikes me as sort of a silly place to try to be cutting this. People need as many staples as they need. In terms of digital media class printing needs, I was wondering if someone could explain what that is.
So we have a digital media program, which was a new art class that was approved, I want to say 2 years ago now, that's been in place. We have a very passionate, active teacher in there, Ms. Sarah, and she works with her kids to do digital design. And as a result, we have seen value in printing kids' work and getting it up at pop-up art displays throughout the school. They are a higher quality because of the nature of the work the kids do with the design, and that's that increased cost is to make sure that we get those. So there's a cultural component to it too. It's not just printing it for the kids. It goes up in the schools and they get to keep their pieces.
And do we have a dollar figure on what the value there is on the ask that wasn't included?
Give me 1 second.
Going, yeah, I won't say $100.
I'm having some technical difficulties tonight in getting my laptop to work. I apologize. I can't get it to you right now because I can't get my mouse to work.
It's fine. I think
but-
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just was going to say, I'll just put the digital media class printing needs and office supplies that weren't included here that were asked for into the parking lot. Given the circumstances, I don't really see any need to revisit travel.
Ms. Willow.
Yeah, so other than the ROTC position that you just talked about, Mr. Langus, about, was it coded wrong, you said?
We're not sure. We're going to investigate it.
Okay.
It's an assistant teacher in the ROTC program. And as Bobby was looking at it more closely, she was able to find the position that is there and the name of the person and itemize it. And we've had a discussion to try to find out why it's there.
Okay.
It might have been there for years, and now we have to figure out.
Right. So I guess that leads me into my question. I know in previous leadership for the district, there was always talk about the amount of administration that we have compared to other districts in the state, and that we're lower. But yet there was talk about a lot of positions possibly, and I don't know this, this is what we've heard, that things are coded wrong and maybe we have more administration than our data shows us. So I guess I want to have a more in-depth conversation about that so that we are all up to speed on exactly what the deal is.
Did you have?
I have no idea any specifics. I just know that it's been talked in the past, and I feel like it has been swept under the rug and we haven't dealt with it, but I don't know if that's just hearsay. I really don't know.
Is that something that maybe Bobby is prepared to speak on? If we have administrators that are coded differently and not in the administrator category.
Right.
Are you asking me to answer right now?
You don't have to, not if you're not ready to, but if you are, that's okay.
Yeah, I can kind of answer. I find new things all the time as it relates to coding. I do think that it's worthy to say that coding changes and how the Department of Education defines certain things changes over time. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with if anybody were to say that it was done in the interest of hiding or skewing anything. But it is our responsibility to ensure that our coding is up to date. And it's a big task, it's a big project because we have as you can see in your detailed budget, all of those are account codes. So we have to make sure that we do the best we can. But in all honesty, I have found things that were not coded appropriately. And over the years since I've been here, we've been changing that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, that we're changing this year. that would be inappropriately coded. I know that there are coding suggestions through federal grants, but that has nothing to do with inappropriately coding something.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel a bit better that you've acknowledged that there has been previous miscoding and that you've corrected them as you've seen them. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you. I just wanted to check in on, so when we're talking about office of the principal, that is the salaries of people who are on the administrative contract, is that correct? Okay,
That's correct.
but not personnel policies necessarily? Okay, thank you.
So it could be, there could be. So
Okay.
as an example, yep. So, and it depends. And this
There's
is another thing.
always an exception to the rule.
There is, and it's actually quite complex. And I couldn't tell you who those people are without actually drilling into those lines.
Okay.
So it really depends on like an administrative assistant, if it crosses between a general government contract or between the personnel policy. I'd have to look at who those people are and determine what contract they're in. So it could, in theory, it could.
Okay,
You could have
thank you.
multiple people. Yeah.
That kind of goes along with what I was kind of suggesting there. Thank you, Ms. Ray, because I think maybe that's more along the lines of what we're hearing, is that school administration could be just under something different, maybe not coded different. I don't know. I feel like there's something missing though from.
Well, we're referencing, in this case, two different things. We're referencing the accounting code structure that we're obligated to abide by, and then we're referencing collective bargaining agreements. And the two don't tie out to one another whatsoever. So if we're asking, could you tell me how many people are located in the office of the principal that might be allocated to an administrator or to the office of the principal? I'd have to research that. How many people, so just keep that in mind, that they're two very different things that we're looking at.
Oh, Ms. Ray?
Sorry, I feel like Member Whitlow and I are having a conversation back and forth, but yeah, I think that's the thing that we're trying to suss out is it just administrators who are in this article, or is it I don't know, how do I say this? Is a school secretary's salary going to be covered in here?
Yes.
Okay, so it could look inflated or deflated based on where they line up in our CBA.
Yep. So the CBA has nothing to do, it doesn't dictate the budget.
Where they go.
Right. The accounting code structure does. So the answer is what's found in the office of the principal is the principal, their assistant principal, their support staff, and all of their supplies and fringe and health insurance and all of that goes along with that. It also contains, and if you look at your detail report, under the description, there's a lot of descriptors there, I admit, but it also contains substitutes for those positions. Let's see what else. You know, anything outside of salary and benefits for their telephone, postage, you know, all that stuff. Dues and fees and supplies and such. But as far as people, I'm looking at one right now. It has a detention duty that's at the high school. So it includes that position as well.
All right, moving to Article 11. That's listed as all other. You can see that there's an item in here for $29,000 with no change. Bobby has explained this to me as crossing guards. I don't know if there are other items in there, there may be some, but it's underfunded annually, and we find the dollars to pay the crossing guards. That's where you can see the FY20 actual at 46.7 and the proposed budget of 29, which is the number that was approved last year and is continued forward.
Yeah, sorry. So we're less, you're spending less?
We're budgeting less than it actually costs us to have crossing guards.
Oh, okay, sorry. I missed that.
Money, the difference is coming elsewhere.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Madeiros comments.
Two questions, I guess. If we're chronically budgeting less than it actually costs, doesn't that suggest that we should probably move the budget more closely into alignment with what it does cost, so that the budget can reflect our actual costs?
Is that for me?
Or whoever.
I'm happy to answer. So in theory, yes, that is what we probably should do. I know that when I came to Lewiston, there was a big discussion about whether or not or how many crossing guards we needed, how often we were using them. I can't tell you why that discussion was happening at the time. I don't have that past history, that past knowledge. So in theory, yes, we probably should be adequately budgeting. And if we find, and I don't have the trend on this, in front of you or in front of me. But if we find that we continue to trend higher than what we budget for, then we should make an adjustment. Given the state of where our budget is at, I had made a recommendation to Superintendent Langless to leave it at $29,000 until we can have another year or so of trend data. But you can always you can add it to the parking lot if you choose.
Yeah, I guess I'll add it to the parking lot, and now that raises other questions about how often we use crossing guards, where they are, and whether we ought to be having more. But the second question I have here is the really weird discrepancy between the percentage of our budget that this article is, 0.03%, and the percentage of a typical district budget statewide, which is 0.45%. So we're talking about, more than, we're less than 10% of what other districts are allocating their budget. What explains that?
I don't know what other districts are budgeting in their Article 11. It's kind of like a catch-all, and I believe in the binder, I don't think it gives you a very good description, but that is what I got from the DOE website. That's just a catch-all for everything else for other districts. I don't know what they're doing with it. This is just where we catch our crossing guards, everything else. And I'm actually kind of proud that we have minimal amount in Article 11. That means that I think we're doing a really good job at allocating our expenses through the instructional articles as well as the operational articles and keeping them out of the all other. It means that we're more transparent.
Yeah,
I'm not indicating that people aren't transparent. I'm just saying that our budget is, in my opinion, quite transparent.
that makes total sense, and I guess then I think my final follow-up question is, if you wanted to zero this out, wouldn't crossing guards sort of fall under transportation?
My understanding is that this is where the Department of Education and the accounting code structure says that it should be. I'm happy to look at that. Honestly, I haven't looked at it this year at all to see if the DOE has made a change, but I believe that this is the right article.
It doesn't matter, I'm just sort of curious. Okay, anyways, I want to put that.
Mr. Davis.
Considering what's happened this year with us in the hybrid model, are we utilizing crossing guards hardly at all?
And that's why I suggested keeping it at the 29,000 so we can see what we're going to be doing with them.
Mr. Wright.
Thank you. I think two questions, and I think Member Majors Collins asked this, but I wasn't entirely certain, so I might be asking again. My apologies. Could we see what we've used year to date for Article 11, whenever that's available? And then the second thing was, one of the documents somewhere in this very large binder talked about Article 11 food service transfer.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, you're going to hear about that probably next budget cycle and a couple more to go. So what that is when your food service program, should it run in the red, we are obligated by law that we cannot have any program run over in the red. And so at some point, the general fund would make a transfer to the food service department to help support, to subsidize that food service program. You will find, I mean, fingers crossed. I mean, Lewis, we are fantastic with our food service program. Alyssa Roman is just incredible. We run one of the only food service programs in the Black, and we want to keep doing that. And we've done a really good job through a crisis, through a pandemic. Our fingers are crossed that we're going to maintain that. But if we ever get to a place where we have to do a transfer, that's where it's going to go.
Okay, I was gonna say, I feel like Director Roman has briefed us on this before and that we are always in the black, but
Yeah.
thanks for that clarification.
Any other discussion?
Right, so we transition to Article 4, which is other instruction. See that on page 1, Saturday. See summer school, co-curricular, and extracurricular. And again, you see a reduction of $348,467. That is a direct result of pulling summer school out of this budget as a reduction with the intent of using relief fund. Again, I remain concerned about that because as soon as the relief funds are gone, it's hard to, we don't have a mechanism to fund that item. In addition to that reduction, I also want to make note that when I ask principals, what are the things that you need? They all brought back something that had to do with extending the school day and extending the school year, which is summer school. Those items that I've reduced, that we have talked about in prior meetings, are not part of that total. That total is just extended school year, extended school day, summer school being reduced.
Well, I think if we go back to our goals for this budget, remediating the impact from the pandemic, summer school and after school programs has to be number one on our priority list, I would think, because it lost so much. So I would just encourage us to maybe put that in the parking lot and come back to that for sure.
Those will potentially be funded by public funds.
Okay.
I just add a little. No, please go ahead. Is that on the same subject or? Yes.
I just want to just add a little more context in the sense that those items that Jake's talking about that were brought to himself and me and Bobby included many of the things that you've already talked about. Elgin asked for several of them to be put on in the parking lot last week, including the boost program and some of those other pieces. It also includes the offset of the 21st Century Program grant, and I think you've all been part of the board at least last year when the president, Jen Carter, made some presentations about how that grant works. And Paul, just for your reference, we received that grant, and it's usually a 3-year grant if we're awarded the funds. But as a district, we have some responsibility each year to take on more of the funding to maintain the program. And so each year that there's the sort of that ask or that need, as well as this year we're in the situation where we have 2 grants that we're applying for and may not receive those 21st Century grant funds. So if we do not receive those grant funds, not only will we not have the program, the piece that the grant would pay, those ongoing grants, but we wouldn't have those programs in full at 2 of our locations because it's been removed from the local budget, which is what supported it this year, along with a lot of our CARES funds last summer and this fall. So I just wanted to add, and that includes everything from transportation to programming to staffing. When we meet, I don't remember when Wednesday special ed. Special ed extended year and extended day programming is not in this article, not in other instruction. It's in special ed. Correct, Bobby? I'm right on that, right?
You are right.
So That's included, that has been removed, so students needing programming through the summer in those special purpose programs. Again, we're looking at COVID relief funds to help support that. But I just wanted to add those items so that you're aware. It's not in this article, but the special ed piece is also a factor.
Mr. Durst comments.
So I guess I'll start with a question, and that is, Superintendent Langlis, you would anticipate this being an item that you would prioritize for funding through COVID relief funds?
Yes.
Okay. So this conversation is not so much about whether this is going to be funded in some way next year. We're committed to funding the necessary remediation for next year. The question here is more whether this ought to be included in the budget because it's likely to be a recurring expense, or if we think this is a one-off pandemic-related thing. And to that end, I strongly feel that this is going to be recurring. It may not necessarily over the long term recur at the same rate, but remediation for learning loss due to COVID is not going to be something that can be solved in 1 year. And unless there are continuing federal funds, forthcoming in future budget years, we're looking at potentially having to add this back all at once or sacrifice real meaningful programming to remediate learning losses. So, my hope is going to be that this committee will, I guess, entertain what I would consider to be honest budgeting, and add this to the regular budget, because the reality is it's going to be paid for either way next year. Maybe what ends up happening is it comes out of COVID fund, but if that's what happens, then we're running the risk of don't fund it the year after. And we all know that the kids are going to need this not just this year, not just next year, but for many years to come in order to catch up on what's been lost during this pandemic.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I would add that the pandemic has polarized some things. But we had students who needed additional time and support on a large scale prior to COVID-19. So I would agree with you in full that this is a recurrent cost. This is providing students that extra time, that extra support that so many of the kids lose.
Something that was just said, so summer school for this summer that's coming up is already covered in our current budget. No. This new budget starts July 1st. Summer school starts before July 1st, doesn't it?
No.
Maybe within a day or two, but it's an FY22.
Okay. I think I just confused myself for a second. Okay, got it. Thank you. Ms. Wright.
I just wanted to add a little bit more color to, I think, the points I would make about moving this into the general fund for this upcoming year have already been made. But to add to that, there is also the reality that this board changes over before next budget season. And so, before I was on the school committee, I didn't spend nearly as much time trying to understand the detail of each budget and how things carried forward. And I was just like, what did these people before me do? I don't understand. And so I think that might raise some eyebrows next budget term when we've only 3 members from last term here now. So I think in terms of, being as transparent as possible, but also showing that this is a priority of this committee. I realize that there are COVID funds available, but I guess I would be curious from the superintendent or maybe someone else in administration to hear, if we redirected this to the general fund, what would you use those COVID funds for?
Well, the COVID funds have a lot of different options. Full disclosure, the most recent past relief funds that we know about, not the recent within the last couple of days conversation. We have not spent. We have asked people for ideas. We have asked people what things they think that we should be considering in the district. And we've looked at everything from additional space, should the variants throw us a curveball, and how do we get more kids in person in the fall. We have looked at summer programming. We have looked at equipment and supplies. We've looked at a lot of things. Notwithstanding additional staff time, and things of those nature. All told, without giving you a spreadsheet, I can tell you that $9 million that sits there will go in a hurry. It doesn't go very far. If you look at a ventilation project or changing a system at a school or rewiring something, it takes significant bites out of those dollars. And my other fear around those dollars, well, I think they're there and they'll be helpful. They're intended for COVID relief. They're not intended to curb your budget and have massive gaps in the future. So what I say in the room right now to Mr. Terrio sitting right here, could we buy some of that technology stuff with COVID relief funds? Absolutely. He will be in an absolute hole 1 year removed from sustaining students and what they need for technology. So no matter what we pay with COVID funds, it is going to leave a gap in the future, unless it's COVID specific, so very specific that it doesn't recur when COVID is gone. And right now, all the things that we're talking about putting in there, minus the space if we need it next fall, has a recurrence to it.
I can understand that entirely, but I think, you know, sorry, Mr. Terrio, I can't see you, but like putting summer school in that position too, you probably hear my cat's angry about it too. So I just, I know there's no good solution, but I would like to raise objection to the fact that summer school is in that space.
So looking at this in the greater picture, okay, it's been a very interesting week so far as the public has begun to chime in. And the initial reaction from what we've proposed has been slightly crazy to completely insane. I don't have anything else on the other end. That's what I'm dealing with right now with the people I talk with. When we take a look at what we're doing, there's a significant expectation from the public that we're going to utilize as much COVID funds as we can to blunt, I'll just say it, to blunt the trauma of what this budget's going to be this year. There's an understanding that, yes, they voted on debt service for the expansion, understanding the ELL situation, understanding the state mandate for the teacher salaries. I think there was some discussion that they look at it, that there's a chunk of expenses that are hitting us this year, that once in play, it's not going to be an additional each year hitting us. Maybe the teacher salary piece, because that's going to continue to elevate. Hopefully the state will make up some of that. Given that they understand that there's a chunk that's not going to be there next year for an increase, it's still going to be there, but it's not going to be an additional increase. That some of these things, such as the deferral of technology or the deferral of summer school, and taking advantage of these COVID funds this year, then that can come back into the budget next year in a more reasonable discussion. When we're not talking about a $6.3 million increase to the budget. I honestly feel that, you know, as we talk about things and talking about parking lots and talk about adding things in, we got a lot of hurdles to jump. And after my discussions this year, I'm under this week, I'm not under any impression that, you know, that there's a lot of wiggle room here. It's pretty definitive, and we have to figure it out with the council. We have to figure it out with the public. We still have questions on our end. We really need to, and I said, you know, we have been, previous committees have been didn't have foresight in what they budgeted, and it come back to haunt us. Well, the point I'm just trying to make is that we have a very significant year where we have large scale impacts starting this year, unlike other years. When if there's things that we can defer, we need to defer, especially in a year where we have federal funding to cover this. I mean, we never had this before. Right? So, you know, certainly when we're asking the public of a big ask It's upon us to try to lessen the blow as best as we can.
Needless to say, what I hear from my constituents is considerably different from what Member Puffin hears from his. You know, the feedback that I get on this is mostly focused around the superintendent's statement that the budget as presented does not meet the needs of our students, and folks want to see the budget change to the point where it does that. You know, I would also point out that I mean, I didn't support this, but the rest of the committee went ahead and gave folks a tax cut last year. And so I think that created an expectation that is simply out of line with reality, that some of these expenses could have been staggered over the course of years, and rather than giving people a tax cut last year and a bigger increase this year, we could have had a more consistent movement. That's not what the committee chose to do. Nothing can be done about that now, but I just think that it's incumbent upon us to fight for robust funding for public education, and to get people to understand that budgeting based on the one-time existence of COVID funds is not a sustainable practice. I would encourage the administration to look at infrastructure-based uses for COVID funds, so that we can make one-time investments that benefit us over the course of many years, and don't require a recurring cost.
This right.
Thank you. Just reflecting on what was just said by Member Majerus Collins, I think too, you know, the planning board put forward a recommendation on the LCIP that wasn't entirely favorable to the school committee. And so, you know, when that comes down through the council, I'm not sure how folks are going to vote on that. Like I said, I think we need to do some education and work on that vote. But I do think, you know, that the idea that maybe we just look at infrastructure improvements and supplies that we're talking about cutting from this budget, you know, if we buy books now with COVID relief funds, they're going to last for however long books last. I assume that's a couple of years. And so we could incrementally build up to a sustainable budget there. I don't know what this school committee will look like a year from now. It looked very different a year ago. So even that has changed a lot. And I don't know that reducing extended instruction is the place where this should happen.
I got to make one other point that really floored me this week, and that is the public is not ignorant to the fund balance situation. We're using $5.9 million in our bank account, cleaning it out at zero to make this budget happen. Now, Bobby, mark me what the history says. Anything I looked at, I never saw more than maybe 2.5, 2.7, 2.8 million a year. There is nothing that says that we're going to find $5.9 million in fund balance next year. And they are quite aware that there could be a $3 million hit just from that, assuming we go historic, say 2.9. So throwing that in the mix on top, significant, and that's just existing operations. It's not even adding anything. So it's very clear so far what I'm hearing is that we have to be fully aware on working towards longer term planning and not adding things in that we have opportunities to do things otherwise. We have to be creative this year. Have to. And that next year gives us an opportunity, like I said, to be able to move things around with a little more comfort. But that being said, that $3 million and that fund balance hole is going to be huge. And So that has to be recognized, and the public has recognized it. And they're very worried the fact that we're gonna drop 5.9 out of our fund balance, because they know what's coming the following year. So that could end up, and that's massive. I mean, that's, if that has to go to the public, I mean, that's just, there's a lot of things with this budget that are cryptic. I mean, they're there, and what happens next year, it could be a lot of issues. So that's why I'm going to play it conservative this year. We don't have the wiggle room to talk about trying to add things in. We don't. This is, the public's already talked about the $1 million that was discussed last week. I mean, they weren't comfortable with the 6, let alone adding another $1 million. So we got some real big internal discussions there.
So continuing Article 4, beyond summer school, we have co-curricular and extracurricular. There's some items there that are up, some percentage points. Those include, stipends. Those include the assistant athletic director and that trainer conversation that we mentioned. I did get some more information from Mr. Fuller, who was wanting to be here tonight, but there's multiple games he's at. If we want to get another night, certainly would be willing to come. The trainer position shift is, it's a change in the way the partners that we've worked with in the past are doing business, and the cost of those trainers annually, they're looking for a 3-year commitment from us. Year 1, $28,000, year 2, $29,000, year 3, $30,000. It doesn't add to our capacity for planning or supervision of other activities and other facilities, and it doesn't give us any consistency for our kids, because that's usually a first-year trainer, and as soon as they find something that they can make a little more coin, they're gone. So that's part of that. Bobby, are there other items in co-curricular or extracurricular you want to highlight?
Yes, sure. Co-curricular, we have a few requests to add a few stipends. DA advisor, poetry out loud, robotics. And then there's an additional increase for transportation, it looks like, for the main guide course that we offer. As far as extracurricular activities, which are all of our athletics, we have, Jake just referenced the athletic trainer. We have volleyball, unified bocce, and all of the supplies and dues that go along with those activities are in this budget. Let's see. Oh, and there's mileage. There's mileage for volleyball officials.
And remember what we brought up last week, a question about volleyball. So I did a little more digging. Traditionally, sport has booster or parent-related costs that take care of a newly added stipend item for 3 years. And in year 1, when I was principal at the high school, Mr. Fuller did a survey with students for 2 reasons. One, there's a development of volleyball has been a growing item locally and throughout the state competitively. And that 2, from a Title IX perspective, we do not offer our female athletes enough options, especially in the fall, which is when volleyball occurs. When he put it out to students to get a level of interest, in the past when he's done this, he'll get 40, 50, maybe 60 kids that will say, I'd be interested in doing that. When he put out this first survey, he had over 150 responses from students saying, I would participate in that as soon as it's available. And so that shifted the conversation last year to say something with that much traction that is that equitable for our entire student body, that also meets Title IX concerns, was something that we brought to the committee last year in year 1, and then here we are for a return. Did not make the budget last year.
Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat myself here. I think adding more athletics, I mean, I'm not even sure the assistant athletic director, the trainer, all those things in this budget make sense. Look, I know it's needed, and I'm not naive to this, but I think this needs to be a bigger conversation. Just not feeling right about it. If there's other things, we're adding these things in, but taking summer school out seems a little bit hard for me to swallow. So. Just about one.
Like cricket should start off as a club sport and then matriculate to a varsity sport.
The reason it's in the budget as a proposal as is to bypass that process because of the level of interest the students have expressed. If approved, this would be a competitive sport next fall.
Thank you.
What goes into the funding for volleyball? Like what does it consist of?
It's pretty minimal, actually. I was surprised how inexpensive volleyball is. You get uniforms, you get officials. The initial cost would be around, your poles, your net, those kinds of things. But once you have that, you have that. But Mr. Fuller represented it as a less expensive sport to do. And it's indoors.
Is there any way to, because I know volleyball has gotten big and it's very big at the rec department. Has there been any talks of maybe, does it go to the budget to maybe try to see at least we get away with it running it kind of through there, at least so to kind of at least get it on board? Is there any talks about kind of like alternatives?
My understanding of it, I don't know all of the ins and outs of this, but the MPA has certain requirements for it to be a school-sponsored sport.
Yeah.
However, it could be school-sponsored, as in it's been approved to happen, but then funded, as Member Wolflot said, as a club that is supported in ways other than most public schools funding.
Mr.
Thank you. I have to agree with Member Whitlow here about the wisdom of including assistant athletic directors and other positions that are not directly tied to instruction while we are reducing extended school year instruction in a pandemic year when the goal has been in-person instruction is the most valuable thing that we could give to students right now. So I would like to put all of that in the parking lot for discussion to be taken out of this budget. I have nothing against our athletics department, but I do think we have very strong programs currently. I wouldn't put the trainer on that because that sounds like it's already being used by our students, and I want to keep our students well that are already in athletics or in wellness programs. But other than that, I would have a hard time passing a straight face test with adding new things. I want to maintain everything we have, but if we're going to cut anything instruction wise, that feels off to me.
I guess I do want to make clear that when I said the trainer, $28,000, $29,000, and $30,000 respectively over a sequence of 3 years, those are costs that we do take on as it stands. The athletic director position was to kind of coincide those two things. So if we say no to the assistant athletic director, we're still on the hook for the trainer. So this would be an add and having that. I want to be upfront that if we take that out, we're still going to be on the hook next year for 28 for the trainer.
So I want to continue the programs we already have, which is athletic training for our students, but not add an assistant athletic director or new sports at this time. There is a policy for sports to come to us. I don't believe that's being followed for volleyball right now. And I understand the reasons why, but the budget implication is hard to not scoff at, I guess.
Superintendent Langus, maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but what I'm hearing from you and what I've heard from you on this is that we currently pay to bring in training services.
Yes.
And that the suggestion here is to replace that contracting with an assistant athletic director who is also a trainer.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a way to potentially even save money, but certainly to spend a relatively small amount more to get a lot more out of it. That to me strikes me as a really sensible decision to support our athletic department. And then when you talk about something like volleyball, it sounds like the costs there are relatively minimal, and I don't want this committee to get caught up in a relatively small amount of money that makes a big difference to a lot of people. When we're talking about public support for funding our schools, popular programs that are cheap are really excellent to support. And that's all beside the issue of, it sounds like we're out of compliance with Title IX. So, I understand that people say, well, geez, sports aren't the most important thing to fund right now. And in the abstract, I might even agree with that. But it's a meaningful thing for a lot of people. It's a relatively inexpensive way to get a chunk of our community excited about what we're doing with this budget. And it also brings us into compliance with our obligations under federal law.
Ms. Whitlow.
Yeah, so I'll just state that if there's a large amount of students who have interest in volleyball and bocce ball or whatever there is, and there's minimal cost in comparison to other sports, then why are we not asking them to fundraise through boosters like our policy states? And I'm just going to reiterate, I understand there's exceptions, but fundraising for 3 years, I believe, before the school district takes it on as a budget is what this policy states. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
I just want to note that I've struggled with that policy since I came to Lewiston, because it asks for the financial commitment of the athletes and or their parents to make a thing happen. And not all of our athletes or their parents have the ability to do that from an equitable perspective. I'm just very mindful of that. If a small cohort of people that have the resources want something, they can go after it. They can create the club and get it done. But not all of our athletes' families land in that place where they have the resources to chase those. That's probably a different discussion for now. I would agree that this does not follow that policy. I do think that policy is something that we should consider.
But there is a difference between boosters and families upping front costs. So I just leave it there.
Mr. Dana.
Of the varsity sports that we have actually have booster clubs associated. Assuming hockey does.
They all do.
There's a lot of boosters clubs. Some do much better financially than others. I don't know the exact number. I think Mr. Cohen could probably get me that as far as what sports might not have a booster club. All of that.
And all of them at one point in time probably went through the process of being boosted.
That I don't know historically.
I've had kids go through, and I can tell you, if it was up to me, I would get rid of all the booster clubs and fund the sports. I think that when you ask people, parents, to go after, my kid was in cheering, it'd be one fundraiser after the other. It was just like insane, to be honest with you. Cast calendar, fundraiser this, fundraiser that. And God forbid that you didn't come in with the minimum that was asked. It was almost like you committed a murder. I'm dead serious. I thought it was, I thought it was pretty ignorant. I don't know if it's still like that, but this was of course a couple of coaches ago. But that's how I think it's just a tough ask parents to constantly do a bunch of fundraiser, and then on top of that, the means to do these fundraisers. It's like, I'm paying out of my money, $50 just because I don't want to hear the nonsense. It was me, I rework a whole booster system, but that's another topic for another time. I think the assistant athletic director who, when Mr. Full is unavailable, who actually is overseeing like the gym or something? Just like some random teacher or?
So it's either no one, or they look for a coach or somebody else affiliated with athletics to help cover things, especially when he has to be in multiple places at once. So for example, if there's basketball games in the gym and hockey games at the Colisee, he either goes back and forth or he picks and chooses. And I've seen him do both. But he's great for people to try to help out.
And weren't they gonna be helping out with some of the field stuff as well? And, you know, we obviously know that our high school has, I think, some of the best outside fields within at least a 50, 75-mile radius. And that brings in quite a bit of revenue. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do rent the facility on a pretty regular basis. That revenue, though, large in part goes into a fund to replace the turf to avoid local cost, or at least minimize it down the road. If we had more capacity, we could schedule more things and allow the surface to be used, and that would generate revenue.
But the potential to generate quite a bit of revenue is there.
Yes.
How rigorous would it be on one person to kind of manage that schedule when it's in full use, which it sounds like from some discussion that it will be used quite extensively despite COVID and obviously the CDC guidelines.
Yeah, I think the reason this position being asked for is to be a supervisor at those sites, to do the bookings, to make sure people follow the rules, the setup, the cleanup, everything from trash to sanitizer bottles, you name it. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a full-time job. We've been fortunate in Lewiston to have Mr. Fuller do things that most other athletic directors wouldn't even consider doing. He lives it, and we're fortunate to have him. But to grow that capacity for our kids, to keep lights on, to have some of the other facilities or spaces be available because we can schedule it, we can supervise it, we can organize it, I think would be beneficial to our kids as a whole.
So in comparison, and almost like help manage those fields, is that almost similar to somebody kind of managing custodian stuff at like inside a school? Was that?
It's pretty comprehensive to look after that facility.
So I misunderstood earlier, and I apologize for not fully fleshing out what this trainer assistant athletic director was. Could you tell me where that person would land? I assume on personnel policies, just a salary range, maybe?
Yeah, it would likely be a personnel policy position. I don't think it'd be high on that scale, but I would envision it being there. As far as exempt, non-exempt, things of that nature, Bobby and her team work with the state to identify those. So I don't have a specific salary number, but I could see it being likely to other year-round positions that exist connected to our schools.
I might suggest a different name for that. I think assistant director sounds like something very different from what we're looking for. And I know, title doesn't matter as much as the salary range to the person applying, but I think it may be more appropriately classified as a coordinator based on what the reality of it is. So, and I also just think you hear assistant director and you think, oh, that's administration, it's going in that line item, instead of, again, the reality where this person is subbing in for the training expense we're already covering and then assisting. I think there might be a better way to talk about it.
Agenda item number 9, report from city council representative.
Sorry, had to do the changing of the guard here. Okay, City Council. So we met last week in a workshop to receive the city spirit presentation on the equity statement, and then had a regular meeting as well. Nothing too exciting happened there, but tomorrow night we also meet in workshop to review the pandemic emergency small business loan and residential landlord loan programs, as well as a review of the building, plumbing, and zoning fee schedules, which will all have impacts moving forward on revenue. I shared this via email, but just for the benefit of the public, I shared last week during my school committee report to the council about the estimated increase in this proposed budget, the fact that the superintendent bolded in the memo that this does not meet the needs of our learners, and that folks had expressed interest in supporting parking lot items already. I received no comment back from the council, but I think that's okay. You know, it's a process, and I will update them again tomorrow on our continued deliberations, of course, recognizing that nothing is set in stone yet because we haven't voted on anything yet, but I think just trying to accurately represent the sentiments that I believe I'm hearing. If folks have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. Agenda item number 10, report from school committee chair. I do not have a report to give tonight. 11, report from superintendent.
I updated on COVID, and I think everything right now is budget and vaccines, budget and vaccines.
Number 12, school committee community announcements. Mr. Butler.
So I want to share with the committee my experience last week. I had the opportunity to be an ed tech for a day in Montello School, and it was quite eye-opening. I worked with both substitutes and the ed techs throughout the day in the myriad of classes from pre-K all the way up to 5th grade rather. And it was interesting to see, and I just want to thank everybody. No one's online here, but I want to thank the staff in Montello that was very forthcoming, very helpful, taking the time, explaining things to me. It was definitely worthwhile. I certainly would recommend everybody to do the same at their different schools. And from it, I got a really good, clear image. We've talked about both of them, the subs and the ed techs, and certainly that it gave me information to have a further discussion on both of them as I saw them play out. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't realize, a lot of stuff that, okay, I thought was happening but didn't. So, but there was a lot that came to light. So I guess I would, I think we're going to have a discussion on the substitutes at some point in time, right? The pay scale and so forth. So, and then the ed techs, I'm sure we'll take up during the special ed session. But I just want to thank Mr. Cliff and all the staff at Montello for taking me in for the day. And learned quite a bit, and I have to say, Montello's not a school I spend a lot of time with. My constituents are not there. Usually I'm in Connors or at McMahon. The level of dedication that I saw that they pour out working with these students, it reminded me almost like a crew on a battleship that embraces their ship. You know, that this is the ship they're on, and everyone I bumped into was Montello. You put a brace of Montello right up front, you know, and it was really impressive, and I did enjoy that the level of commitment, and I didn't get the sense that a single person would want to change schools there. They were Montello, period. And oddly enough, there was a common theme at the end of the day. And that is, wow, you're here. So you guys actually do realize we exist. And that was repeated to me, person after person after person after person. And that told me something, you know, that we have to take a look at our schools and seeing what we're paying attention to or not paying attention to. In terms of recognizing the work that goes on. And that, you know, I think we can do better to bring everybody up on par. And certainly we started to have some of that conversation last week with equity and so forth. So it was an interesting comment, interesting time, and I just want to share that experience. Look forward to talking about those particular issues in the future with my experience.
Mr. Beaumont.
I'd like to segue that a little bit by asking Chairman Parks about that employee recognition letter she sent out on behalf of the committee and the responses you received and what it told you.
I received roughly a dozen responses, and a few of them commented how they had never been acknowledged by the school committee before. One person commented that he'd worked for Los Public Schools for I think like 40 years and had never once been acknowledged by the school committee. So there was a lot of appreciation for that.
Thank you for doing it for all of us.
That's right.
Just following up on Member Potvin's, thank you for sharing that, but has there been a change in school visitor policy? I thought that educators and people contracted with the buildings were the only ones allowed in, and when did that change?
I think we've treated members of the committee as people who can go into the schools. We're here now in the school space, so that's an area that I feel comfortable as a superintendent allowing to be a permissible visit. Of course, we ask everyone to follow all the guidelines.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Definitely did not realize that would be allowable.
Mr. Richards-Collins.
I want to remind any members of the community that are listening at this point, first of all, express my sympathy to you, but that ultimately we're relying on all of you to get us back towards some semblance of normalcy. And we're now at a point where a decent chunk of the community is eligible for vaccination, those 60 and older, and those in a number of frontline professions, including educators. And if you have the ability to get a vaccine now, you would be doing a great service to this district and to its students by doing it as quickly as possible. And ultimately, that's what's going to be able to get us back towards any sense of normal.
I did. I've been in the schools, and I would just encourage, kind of piggybacking off what Ron said, just if you're able to, you know, it's a great thing to go down and see and actually talk to some of the teachers. Even if you can't, even a school like McNeil, which I believe is still on Zoom. Yeah. I mean, even a school like that where maybe you don't feel comfortable going to school yourself, and, you know, I've been able to actually saw some literacy through McNeil on Zoom when they were in quarantine, when they were quarantined again. So I just encourage other members to kind of see the teachers and teaching kids and some of the challenges that they have to embrace and how they do well with it.
I just wanted to share with the committee as well as the community, our community partners for our day programming. They'll have some additional slots available. I think we've shared before, we've decided to, as a district, use some remaining COVID funds from one or two of the grants to continue that programming and expand it. So within the next couple days, there should be a new flyer out there, and there are some additional spots at many of the community partners. And we look forward to having families take advantage of that. So.
Yeah.
the dyslexia subcommittee has met twice and been working on a collaboration of screening for younger kids up to second grade. Is that kind of thing, or is that just like the second and third grade? So that's kind of the first steps is how do we recognize, how do we determine who is dyslexic? So I think there's been some really good work by Sue and Karen to start the initiative.
I forgot, I probably could have done it during the chair report, but I guess it falls under community announcements. Also, the committee that is the interview committee for the principal for the high school is underway. We met twice last week and we'll be meeting again this week to determine who the next principal for Wilson High School will be. Or we're starting the process that will be to determine who the next principal for Wilson High School will be.
So you guys have had like first round interviews or just going through applications?
The first day we went through application resumes, and then the second day we interviewed 4 candidates, and we'll be interviewing more on Tuesday, tomorrow.
And I can just add that the next step is to make a recommendation to narrow the number of candidates down for our second round of interviews, which Superintendent Langlis will facilitate. And I think I can share that it will involve hopefully large numbers of students and families and community members and staff as well.
Great. That's exciting.
Number 13 is future agenda items. No. Agenda item number 4. Oh, sorry, Ms. Wright.
Thank you. I just again wanted to ask, I think some of the subcommittees have some work that was assigned to them. And so I wanted to ask the facility subcommittee when they might expect to have something voted out of committee on the climate resolution. And then I think in terms of policy, I just wanted to let folks know that things have been moving much slower than I would have anticipated on that front. So I do apologize that there hasn't been quite the volume we initially anticipated, but meeting times are hard to find.
I think it's our procedural rules that spells out that the subcommittees will report out to the committee as a whole once a month. And so I'm guessing that the full report out will be on the next agenda. Agenda item number 14 is to adjourn.
Second.
Your motion.
So moved.
Okay.
That's second.
And Ward 4.
Oh, yes.
5. 6.
Yes.
7.
Maybe I'll say no just to see if anyone's paying attention, but yes.
City Council.
No.
Ward 1. Myself is yes. Ward 1. 2.
Yes.
3.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn, 8 to 1.
8 o'clock on the dot.